Sorry, guys. I've got something weird happening with my speakers.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Alex. Are you there?
Yes.
Welcome. I'm sorry, I've got something weird happening with the speakers playing. There we are. What was that? Was that you? Got some weird stuff going on. Sorry, I've got something weird happening with the speakers. Oh,
It's all right. It's done now.
It was my Instagram live that was playing it back to me. I've had to end the Instagram live. So yeah. Anyway, right. Welcome, Alex. Welcome, everybody. Hello. This is another typically chaotic weekly 5 Fact Friday, which is when I pick the 5 bits of new information, news or data, or something that I think is relevant to the housing market. I'm not always right, and there's often disagreement, but these are the 5 things I think are at least 5 of the most significant things that I have linked to in the link below, so you can all go and check out the link sources. Alex and I have not had even 10 seconds of discussion before this video, so anything could happen, and it probably will. And what we're going to do is we're going to whistle through the 5 facts of the week, and I will invite Alex to tell me whether or not he thinks they are indeed relevant one way or another, and whether I've missed something that he knows of. And after that, he and I will have a bit more of a free-ranging conversation and a chat, and with you guys as well, because why not? That's always fun, right, on a Friday.
What else have we got to do in the afternoon?
What else exactly? What else have we got to do? I would also like to point out this. Okay, this is a. I feel I got this hot potato in my hand. Gonna burn my fingers. This week's 5 Fact Friday contains news about the general election, and politics is quite rightly a deeply emotive topic for many people. There are also those who don't care about it and are apathetic, and all of that understood, but deeply triggering is the best word for so many people on so many levels. But what I want to point out before we go there, and it's not going to be a political discussion, it's going to be an election discussion. And Alex, hold me to that. If you think I've slipped politics, call me out. It's going to be a discussion purely in the context of how the election may or may not affect the housing market. And whether or not people believe me, I can assure you, and I would like to think Alex will back me up and he'll tell me if he does or not, I am politically neutral. Okay. Now, there are things that we're going to discuss which talk about whether some parties are doing this or other parties are doing that. But what I've noticed is that if you even mention a party, opponents of that party, and it can be any of them, think that you are automatically a supporter of that party unless it's an outright condemnation of that party. So you cannot, what I've discovered is you cannot mention a political party unless you are either condemning it completely, because if you mention a political party without condemning it, you are giving them airtime and therefore you are a supporter of them. Now, that may be your opinion. I can assure you that is not the case for me. I'm pretty sure, Alex, you're the same, aren't you? You can talk about that.
Absolutely.
But most importantly, the point I wanted to make is this, and this is a deeply important point to me personally, because I do think that our political system is by far and away the number one culprit for the state of our housing market, and therefore the number one thing that needs to change. However, not without getting into the opinions of what the changes should or shouldn't be, but change is desperately required. And my FFS in the title of this video is because of the complete lack of any change even being offered by the main parties at the moment. And therefore, it is a reflection of my despair over the fact that there is unlikely to be any change. This also means that occasionally, if I see even a glimmer of hope of any change, I can get overexcited quite quickly. Right? As someone who's desperate for any change at all, just to unlock the gridlock of the absolute absence of change in the UK housing market for such a long time, which is why we're where we are. I will get overexcited and overenthusiastic and overpassionate about the prospect of any change, even if it comes from the consequences of people or parties that I don't necessarily agree with or like. The thing that came to mind, Alex, for me was sort of setting a thief to catch a thief, and my, I used to outsource some of my software development to Russian software developers, and I used to go out there an awful lot and visit them. And I remember talking to them about what a so and so Vladimir Putin was, and I remember them saying to me, the only hope that Russia had of not being gripped by gangsters was to be run by an even bigger gangster.
Yep.
Because only someone who could stand up to the gangsters would have any chance of actually governing the country. And I thought that's a really interesting point. And so when you've got a political gridlock, ordinary decent people are unlikely to make any difference in there. You need a political hand grenade of some kind. Anyway, so please, guys, if the conversations in this video, if you find yourself strongly disagreeing with the commentary or the policies or anything else, let us know why you disagree with the policies. Let us know why you disagree with the comment. But try, if you can, to refrain from saying what you think about people on a personal level, whether it's other people in the comments, whether it's me or Alex, or whether it's the politicians, because honestly, that's irrelevant. That is the trap we all fall into when we become polarized, which is, well, he is this or she is that. But because all we're saying when we do that is, oh, that person doesn't count. But actually, that's when all discussion ends on something constructive, which is, well, what policy would work and what policy wouldn't work? And can they actually deliver policy? And is there evidence of actual change? So that's what I'm going to say. That's like a heads up at the beginning of the call, at the beginning of this call. Yeah, it feels like a call, actually. Before we get into it. But without further ado, sorry, I've already spent 8 minutes.
You love a preamble.
Are you still there, Alex, or are you falling asleep?
No, I'm still awake. But
let's have a sip of tea. And let's get into the 5 facts of the week, which you don't. Do you know what they are? Have I posted them anywhere? I don't think I have.
No.
So we're going to start with one. The first one is actually in the rental market, and these are in no particular order. These are just 5 facts in no particular order that have influenced, that I think are relevant news in the housing market. Now, the first one is about so Good Lord, which is a provider of technology to lettings agents, was talking about how they have a monthly rental index. And they're talking about how rents rose to a new 7-month high, but the rise is slowing a little bit. And most importantly on here, they talk about voids lengthening. Now, a void period is the period that a landlord has their property sitting empty in between tenants. And voids across England lengthened during May, hitting an average of 21 days. And this is a rise from 19 days to 21 days. So that's an almost, that's an over 10% increase in the average void period in a month. I think that's significant. Average voidage, there's a word I didn't know existed, voidage. It's now 11% higher than at the same time last year, suggesting a slight lessening of the imbalance between demand and supply. Right. On the same story, the BBC reported on the back of Zoopla's data. Hang on, sorry. Let's just do that. The BBC reported rents rise at 6.6% a year, but the pace is slowing. And this is data from Zoopla. Rents continue to grow faster than average earnings, although the gap is much narrower than a year ago. And he goes on to say that he's a continued slowdown in rental price growth to 5% by the end of this year. And Alex, what I wanted to just double check off the top of your head, am I right in saying that if nominal wage growth stays at the level it is now and rents fall, that would mean that real rent would be falling, right?
If not, if normal wage and rents fall. Yes.
Yeah, rough. So in other words, if
depending on the amounts, but yeah, I mean that would be the direction.
If nominal wage rises stay above 5% and rent growth slows to 5%, then of course at an individual level it affects everyone differently. But overall, that would be an improvement in the situation, wouldn't it? And, and it's in line with what you and I both expected, but it's just taking its sweet time. I remember saying,
technically, and I don't know if you may be able to answer as to why this is. If you look on Rightmove at rents in this area in Putney, there has been no reduction. Everything is still the same as it was 3 or 4 months ago, or slightly higher. But walking through the high street and looking in estate agents' windows, there are a number of properties of the same spec that appear to be on cheaper, but they're not on Rightmove. They're just in the windows of estate agents. I don't know if that has any meaning at all, or is just an anomaly.
Well, you get the same problem with overvaluing in the lettings business that you do in sales, which is that in order to win a landlord's business, agents will often overvalue. And of course, landlords and agents both want to get the maximum rent that they can, generally speaking. And I think that, you know, they will continue to want to show rents as being high, but I think actual deals being agreed are often being agreed below asking price. In some areas, not in others, of course. But what you see in an estate agent's window could be for several different reasons, depending on what their tactics and strategy are. Sometimes they're just out of date because if it's physical paper, or were you looking at screens? Were these screens or was it physical?
Both. But what was interesting is that they were recent. They had not been on the market long. They'd never hit Rightmove. But for a 2-bedroom flat, let's say, they were £200 to £300 cheaper than the cheapest one that is shown on Rightmove.
Well, that's very interesting because, again, they know that everyone looks on Rightmove, and so to set price expectations to go there. But if it would also suggest to me that agent wants people coming in off the street, they want tenants. Perhaps they're actually slightly keener for tenants in some places than they were before, and that would be quite a good way to get tenants to walk in.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, so that was fact number one. Fact number two, transaction volumes, which is really important. This is housing sales transaction volumes. The government released HMRC. This is HMRC, not Land Registry, not ONS. It's HMRC on the government website. And what I want everyone to pay attention to here is because in such a sensitive market that we're in now, I think this is relevant. So the red line is the seasonally adjusted line going back to April 2021. So back 3 years, right? We've got 3 years worth of data here. The green line is non-seasonally adjusted, or what I call actual figures. And the red line is just there to sort of smooth out the spikes and the troughs, which you can see that it does actually, right? But if you want to know, like when you're looking at year on year, I think seasonally adjusted makes more sense. But when month on month, they reported that transactions were up, and you saw lots of media outlets going, "Oh, transactions are up, transactions are up, transactions are up." But actually, look at the green line for the truth, and it is helpful that they put both there together. Actually, transactions stopped going up, having gone up the last 2 months, right? Having dropped down in January, but then picked up in February and picked up in March. They actually fell back in April. And what we can infer from that is that, and there's an increasing amount of data pointing this way, there was definitely an uptick in transactions in the first quarter of this year, no doubt. And in fact, I've seen a lot of completions. I've seen through the data that I have and the people that I deal with, I've seen a lot of completions happening in May, in fact, from deals that were agreed in Q1. So we're now just beginning to see the evidence of Q1's uptick in activity coming through in completions in the May data. But that transaction volume across the country dropping, yeah.
Charlie, Martha has made a good point, and she's right. This is non-residential.
Oh, sorry.
You need the other
Yeah.
one. There you go.
Where are we? Yeah. Okay. Oh God, I've got that around my ears then, haven't I?
Yeah. It's the one underneath. There you go.
Oh, here we go. No, well, in that case, I have just been looking at the wrong graph. So that makes me feel quite silly. Dunce hat for Charlie.
That said, as you can see, I mean, you can't count 21 because 21 was utter madness.
Yeah.
But if you look back to say 14, which was after Help to Buy and wage recovery, 14 to 19, you'll see that we're still below that trend.
Yeah, exactly. And 29, and so the seasonally adjusted is still the red line. Yeah. It's trending up more than the green line. So okay, let me get back to the actual numbers then, because I remember reading these numbers at the top and thinking, so seasonally adjusted is 10% higher than a year ago, and actually non-seasonally adjusted is 17% higher than a year ago. But, and here we are, 9% lower than March. So sorry, I was right. So the seasonally adjusted figure of residential, right? Can you just confirm I've got this right?
Yes, yeah, these are the right ones.
Right, 5% monthly increase on seasonally adjusted, but actually a 9% fall in non-seasonally.
In real numbers. Yeah.
Oh, thank God for that.
Yeah.
I was really beginning to doubt my sanity at that point.
No, it's the same between resi and non-resi. We've got exactly the same setup. And the problem is when you compare it with a year earlier, we know that January to March of 23 was the massive panic. I mean, those were the biggest falls. So when you compare with a year earlier and they say, oh, it's higher than 23. Well, yes, that's because in March and April of 23, things were absolutely dire. But in comparison with 14 to 19, so 2014 to 2019, we're still lower. And in fact, in real terms, we're still lower than we were the month before. So it's not as if the market is going up. April normally has a slight drop, but it's not exactly the ecstatic headlines that we saw across a lot of the media outlets.
And the relevance of this, is what bears repeating for everybody, right? Which is that if your interest is in making it easier to move, the more transactions that are happening, the easier it is to move. The fewer transactions that are happening, the harder it is to move. And so I am a massive fan of more transactions, which is why, and shorter the transaction times, because that helps everybody, buyers, sellers, and agents alike. It's the one thing that everybody can get behind. More transaction volumes is good for everyone, including the economy. And a 9% drop compared to a 5% increase on season adjusted, that's my point. What I wanted to make out is for people who are looking at the market, and a lot of agents do this, they look at the news and go, oh, look, transactions in April are up. No, they're really not. They're down 9%. There's a 14% difference in seasonally adjusted and non-seasonally adjusted. And especially for an agent, what matters is what's actually happening. Oh, God, thank God. I feel like for a minute, I thought, I've gone mad. I was absolutely sure that these numbers definitely backed up what I was saying. And they do. So that's good. Right. Next point. We'll skip over this one just for this point. And we'll come on to it more at the end. Nigel Farage, in the last 7 days, announced his intention to stand for election in Clacton and to become the leader of the Reform Party. Now, I think that single event, that single piece of news, is arguably the single biggest potential impact on the housing market. Potentially, and we'll discuss why later. The single biggest piece of news affecting the housing market in a very long time. In fact, I don't know of anything that's affected it as much since the mini budget fiasco, which just was an absolute curveball for the housing market at the time. Now, whether it's for better or worse, I don't know. And one of the comments I want to make on this just now is that I, this morning, took it upon myself to go and look across all 6 of the political parties' housing manifestos, including the Workers' Party, the GB Workers' Party, led by George Galloway. And just the headlines, right? The Lib Dems, by far, had the most detailed analysis and the most detailed policy suggestions of what they would do if they got into power. It genuinely surprised me. I've linked to it below. The Lib Dems were in a league of their own in terms of how much analysis and consideration and thinking and planning that they've given to the reform. A detail, like a lot of detail. Really impressive, actually. And on the other end of the and by the way, it was actually the Workers' Party who were the second most impressive on housing manifesto. George Galloway's manifesto has the word housing in it 19 times. Reform was number 3, and then the Green Party have not updated the housing manifesto on their website since 2010. 2010, 14 years since the Green Party
in a tent, you bastard.
Right. Stop! Don't go there yet. Don't trigger anybody. Labour, even Labour, does not have a housing policy section on its website anywhere. All it's got is a couple of press releases. One about house building intentions and changes, and gives baseless guff about what they're going to do. We're going to first dibs, right? First dibs on new build. It's one of those classic election manifesto things that means that first-time buyers in this country will get a first refusal on properties being built before foreign investors can buy them.
Yeah, how's that going to work for the developers?
This is my point. Like, you can imagine a builder's going, yeah, we'll just take longer and sell them for less when we've got rich overseas investors. Well, that's no problem. We'll do that. I mean, come on. Fuck
just
me.
ban foreigners from buying more than one property in the UK. There you go.
So Labour has no housing policy elaborated on its website at all. And then we get on to the Conservatives, who do not even have the word housing once anywhere on their whole website.
You're kidding.
Not one single instance of the word housing appeared.
Does it say mansion or estate?
No.
Oh,
there is absolutely nothing on the Conservative Party website about housing. Actually, nothing.
It's nuts.
I'm speechless about that. Right, so this is fact number, I've lost count, 3 or 4.
3. Okay,
so Farage comes into the election, Reform comes into the election. That has created a lot of uncertainty in the election, which we'll come and discuss later. Next point. The next point is actually Labour's announcement last night. I'm going to try and remain impartial and cool and calm and collected here, but I am frustrated, and I'm deeply frustrated because this is the most likely party to win the election, and this is what they've managed to come up with. And
have you got some more helium just to get that balloon a little higher?
No, but okay, I'll get straight to the point, right? They've announced a mortgage guarantee scheme. And of course, the headlines make it sound like it's new, but it is not. It is literally nothing more than an extension of the existing 95% help to mortgage guarantee scheme by the government. It is literally, they're removing the expiration date of June 2025.
When did the Conservatives bring that in 21, was it?
Yeah, I think so. So this is a very old Conservative policy that Labour have gone, yeah, all right, we'll keep that. It changes nothing. And those 3 words. Okay, what have I said that the housing market needs? Change. What does this do? It changes nothing. And even by their own figures, look at that. 80,000 young people over the next 5 years. What's that? 16,000 a month, a year? That's just like, it's nothing. And it's a stoking demand rather than solving supply problem. And of course, they said, oh, yes, we're going to build 1.5 million houses, blah, blah, blah. But there is absolutely no substance or credibility that I can find anywhere about how they would deliver. Because if they would, I would support it. I would be a Labour supporter and a Labour voter if I thought they had policies that would actually improve the housing market. Even manifesto promises that would actually, even if they had hollow promises that looked and sounded good and deliverable, I would probably support them. And this is what we're going to get. We're going to get nothing. We're going to get a big fat nothing burger and more of the same. And they are so toothless as a party. They're so toothless that all of this, oh, we're going to make house builders give first dibs to first-time buyers. Yeah. It's just a joke. It's an absolute waste of space joke. And I'm frustrated and annoyed about it because basically that's what we're going to get. Unless, come on to that later, right? Yeah, and then, of course, someone else has called it Labour launches a help to buy style freedom to buy scheme.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last fact. So fact number 5. One moment. Is this one. And this is Europe, not the UK, but the European Central Bank decided to cut their rate this week by 0.25%, which was a mild surprise to me. I wasn't expecting it. I thought they were going to hold because their inflation is not easing as they'd hoped. We could talk about what this means and what it doesn't mean, but it's Europe, so it's not really that relevant. I don't think it's worth talking about. More than to say, I suspect it means that they are worried about their weakening economy, even though inflation is still not yet being tamed by them. I haven't asked you, Alex, if you have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's relevant in the same way the Bank of Canada did exactly the same thing. So we've had both the Canadians and Europe reduce their interest rate by 0.25%. That suggests to me that the global economy is finally feeling the fragility that it's really been suffering for ever since the COVID lockdowns. And before that, bear in mind, we were on the cards to head into a recession in this country in 2019, at the end of 2019, and that only disappeared because of all the COVID money that was made available. So yeah, I think this could be the beginning of that downturn. And I've told you many times that my expectation is that the Bank of England will reduce in August, although I still don't see it for June for this month, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think this is directly from the ECB's website. So at the same time as having lowered the rates, they are saying that despite the progress over recent quarters, domestic price pressures remain strong as wage growth is elevated and inflation is likely to stay above target well into next year. The latest projections for both headline and core inflation have been revised up for 2024 and 2025 compared with March projections. So this is, I mean, that might be surprising you, isn't it, Alex? Because you've always been someone that's saying you're expecting inflation to fall off a cliff and turn into deflation. Do you think that's not going to happen now, or it's just taking a lot longer to get there?
Not really. I mean, okay. Bear in mind, inflation was 11.1%, really not very long ago. The fact that we're talking about numbers starting with 2, to my mind, is falling off a cliff. It's come down as fast as it went up, and everyone said inflation has rocketed up. Now, core inflation, different thing. Core inflation is remaining sticky, although, again, it's come down substantially. And we're going to see inflation here drop again in the next print. So, I would argue that inflation has fallen like a stone. And there are many people who suggest that target inflation shouldn't be at 2 or 2.5%, but should, in fact, in the modern economy, service industries, be around the 3 to 4% mark. Regardless of that, when we see inflation coming down as it has, but we see increased unemployment, certainly in Canada, you're seeing that, and then central banks start to cut rates whilst they're not at their target inflation, suggests that the economy is really fragile and weak, and that doesn't bode well. That suggests recession, which would then lead into the full-blown potentially deflation.
Yeah.
Rather than just disinflation.
A lot of that coming out of the US as well. So there's there's a guy who does an American housing market commentary on YouTube saying that Florida properties have now effectively completely gone cold, and people are struggling to sell, and prices are turning. I haven't been paying close attention to that, but there we are. Those are the 5 facts anyway. So just a quick recap for those of you who've joined us in the beginning. The 5 facts of this 5 Fact Friday are: rents have increased year on year, but not as much as the ONS says. Zoopla says that they're lower than the ONS does. That's fact number 1. Number 2, HMRC shows that housing transactions fell 9% in April from March. Nigel, fact number 3, the election, I think, just became a lot less certain than it was because Nigel Farage has entered the fray. Not because it's going to change the fact that Labour will get the most seats, but this is what I want to come on to talk about in a minute with you, Alex. It's no longer an absolute open goal for a majority, I don't think. And we'll discuss that in a minute. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I'll come on to that in a sec. Number 4, Labour has announced their freedom to buy scheme, which is basically just something that already exists that they're going to extend. So it's nothing new. And number 5, the ECB has cut their interest rate 0.25%, which means that there is a slightly higher chance that the Bank of England will cut their rate 0.25% at some point this year. And I agree with you, Alex, that August, they're not going to cut them in June. They might in August or September, whenever the date is. They might not. And my original guess that I made at the beginning of the year of 1 rate cut this year, I still think is probably the most likely outcome.
Depending on what happens with the economy, yes, potentially.
So, now let me just. Oh, I've got an announcement to make because I also know that there are a lot of estate agents who watch the Moving Him and Charlie channel, and this is also going out live on the Best Agent channel as well. Anyway, Best Agent Day on the 27th of June has been rescheduled to the 4th of September. When we initially announced the date for Best Agent Day, the election had not been announced. And it's become increasingly clear that, the biggest TV debate is on June the 26th. And so having it on just 1 week before the election was going to not work for lots and lots of reasons. So we pushed it back past the summer holidays to the 4th of September. But to all of those agents who have registered early, thank you very much to all of you who did, and you locked in your early registration bonus. That bonus stands. And what we've done is we've stopped the countdown timer on the early registration bonus. So it stays where it is now, it's currently £210, I think. And it will resume on the 14th of August when there are 21 days left to go to the event. So that's, I'll be sending out information about that to everyone relevant. But yeah, anyway, now back to why I think the potential for change in the housing market now exists. Now, I want to be sure, just before anyone calls me a fucking reform supporter, okay, I am not a supporter of anybody. And actually, looking at the housing policy, one of their policies is very much pro small landlords. And I don't think that's a good idea for several reasons. So I do not even agree with all of their housing policy. Some of the other points I do think are good. That one I don't think is good because I think it makes affordability worse for buyers. But here's the thing, right? So I think everyone's predictions are going on what the polls say. And everyone's predicting what could and what would and wouldn't happen if the election result was based on the most recent poll. But I think you've got to zoom out a bit and look at the trend in the polls. I am aware that no party is going to get more than 0 or 1 or 2 seats unless they are polling above 20%. In the polls, roughly speaking. That seems to be a consensus from pollsters and commentators from across the spectrum. And different polls are putting the scores at different levels. I mean, thank you to all of you who voted in my polls on YouTube and on X. Interesting results. I have a lot of reform supporters on my YouTube, in my YouTube following. something like 45% of the vote would vote reform. On X, it wasn't quite as high, but it was still higher than anyone else. It was 38% on X. And we had nearly 2,000 votes, and then 35%. So, yeah, hey, listen, I can't control my audience. And everyone from every background is welcome if you're here to talk about housing. But this is what I think politics, when you're talking about it, should be about. I think it's not about what we personally feel or think about any party or person or even policy. If you want to see what's going to happen in an election, you've got to think to yourself, you've got to remove all emotion completely, remove all opinion about policies and go, which demographics are going to react how to these different events? Right? Totally objective, impartial. So this takes me back to my politics studies, right? And I had the best politics teacher. So after I got expelled from school, Alex, I ended up at a tutorial in Brighton. I had one-to-one tuition for my A-levels. And I had this, I mean, he was basically a rock guitarist who was paying the bills by teaching politics. We used to sit in these two wing-backed leather armchairs in his attic, smoking and drinking during the day. I was a teenager, talking about politics. And he was brilliant because he was, as a teacher, I mean, I remember that particular place I went to, it was in Brighton. They did have outstandingly good teachers because it was really expensive. And they had very high quality teachers there. And I never once, even he wouldn't admit to me privately what his politics were. And as a teacher of politics to me, I've never forgot that I could not tell what his political leanings were.
But then he was doing his job properly.
That's my point. And this is the point. I've kept that with me. And I think that's why I've never, ever been a supporter of any one political party. I've always taken a look at, well, hang on a second. Who's doing what and why? How's that likely to affect votes and polls and all this kind of stuff? So this is what I think, this is what I'm hoping our discussion now might be like, right? It's not about whether you think anyone is or isn't, insert expletive adverb or adjective here. It's about how you think the electorate is going to react. That's what I think is worth discussing. And if you can just discuss it like that, hopefully it doesn't trigger anyone too much. Yeah. So the thing that I've noticed that most people are saying is that it's not going to make a difference to the election. Nigel Farage's appearance as an election candidate and leader of the Reform Party is not going to make a difference to the outcome of the election, because the only thing he's going to do is take Tory votes away, and therefore he's going to increase the likelihood of a Labour victory. That's a generalization of the consensus view, right? Would you agree with that observation?
That is what most people are saying, yes.
Yeah. So I'm not asking if you agree with the statement. I'm asking if you agree that that's what most people seem to be saying. Now, I think two things. First of all, I think that there is a large population of people in this country from a complete spectrum of social demographic backgrounds who find politics itself overwhelming, boring, annoying, frustrating, and don't actually have a political home, but tend to vote the way that they do because that's what their mates or their family do. Right? Mm-hmm. Which is fine. That's just the way it is. A lot of people don't really know. They haven't looked into the details. They haven't studied policies. They don't even like talking about politics, frankly, because they don't have enough information at hand to be able to express an opinion, which is why it always ends up discussing into, what do you think of that bloke? What do you think of that woman? Which is, in my view, an utterly futile exercise to discuss the individuals, because it's of no consequence, really. Discussing their actions, discussing their achievements, yes, but discussing the individuals is pointless because, anyway. So, first of all, the polls show a Conservative wipeout is almost a certainty, right? All of them are saying like very, very low, single digits, basically. Therefore, there aren't that many more votes to be had from the Conservatives. They've already lost most of them, according to the polls. And what's left are just the dyed-in-the-wool. Either they're just lifelong Tory voters, or they're people who, like I described, just vote Tory because that's what they do, and that's what their friends do, and that's it, and they don't really want to talk about it. That's what's left. But so many previously floating voters who were floating but tended to vote Tory are so pissed off with 14 years of Tory rule that they're going, right, off you go, we're going to vote Labour now because there is no other credible party to vote. Voting Lib Dem is a wasted vote, voting Green is a wasted vote, we're just going to vote Labour because actually the current iteration of Labour isn't that different, it's not extremely left-wing, and therefore, as former Tory voters, we're not that uncomfortable voting for Keir Starmer because he's basically a kind of Tory light. You know, it's like this is with the whole uniparty, they're both the same thing, voting for the same thing. And so I think there is a large part of the people who are perceived and the people who these tiny, tiny polls are telling us are currently going to vote Labour, who are doing so because they don't think anyone else is worth voting for. Now, because this demographic that I described to you from across the political spectrum and from across the demographic spectrum, and I'm talking about across the age spectrum, across the background spectrum, whether they are born and bred Brits or whether they're immigrants, it doesn't matter. Across all of those spectrums, the element of those demographics who do talk about the people in the politics, right? They don't talk about policies because they don't have them at their fingertips what policies are. They've suddenly got Nigel Farage to talk about. And most people won't talk about Nigel Farage and support him publicly. There are plenty who do, but I think there are more who secretly support him who don't say so. I really think that. And I don't think that's borne out in the polls. I think maybe it's borne out in my poll. And that's why I think that the chances of reform actually getting enough votes to get enough seats. I understand how the voting system works. I understand how seats work. And I understand about how if they aren't concentrated in the right places, they won't get the seats, all that kind of stuff, right? I still think that there is a potential swing of people who will privately, secretly, they might not even have told their family and friends that they're going to vote for reform, but they're going to. That's what I think is going to happen. A lot more than people realize. There's no question of them getting into power. I don't, that's just not going to happen. I mean, if it did, I would eat my own hat. Labour will get the most seats. I no longer think it's a certainty that they will get a majority. Let me be clear. I'm saying I don't think it's a certainty they'll get a majority. Is it still likely they'll get a majority? Possibly. Is it less likely that, but still possible, that Reform will get enough seats to be in opposition? Okay, even if Labour get a majority, it might be Reform who are in opposition. If what I've just said is true, which is far more people end up voting, and it does actually create a weird landslide from Tory voters to Reform voters. So it's just an absolute Tory wipeout. And we have Reform in, hypothetically, potentially, as the opposition. I don't think that's impossible. I think it's unlikely. I don't think it's impossible. And for me, the Tories would be such an ineffective opposition to Labour because they've just ceased to function as a party. That's what I see, right? I mean, I don't think Labour functions as a party either, but I think the Tories have ceased to function completely as a party. They just don't. They've actually, for some time, they've just ceased functioning as a party. They've got an unelected. Even their own members didn't vote for their current leader. It's just, it's almost like a sort of weird caretaker situation at the moment, just waiting for the election. So, and I want to put this up on screen because this actually was one of the most useful comments I have seen. Here we are, from someone on YouTube who commented on this point. Right now, this is a fantastic example of what I call a constructive and robust counter arguments to what I'm saying. All right. So this is a comment on my post on YouTube where I said what I just said to you guys, right? And so Le Fricola, if that's how he's pronounced his name, says, I generally agree with your take. Is that on the screen?
Yeah.
I generally agree with your takes, but this is miles off. Firstly, Reform was polling at about 12%, but was still a long way from projection to win a single seat because of the first past the post system. With a 5% swing, they still might, and are probably, not be forecast to win a single seat. Secondly, Labour will have absolutely nothing to do with Reform under any circumstances. Hell, they'll get into bed with the SNP before Nigel Farage. Okay. Thirdly, the emergence of Reform currently only means that Labour's majority will increase. Okay. And fourthly, housing is probably one of the least likely policy areas to be on the table in any hung parliament negotiation. It's not something which is influencing voting for the majority of the electorate. Okay, I'd like to respond to those and then ask you for you, because I've been talking for a long time now. Polling at 12% might get another 5% to 17%. Well, they're already polling at 17, 18% now, and they're trending upwards. So my reaction to that first point is, I suspect that the polling trend is going to continue to rise, firstly. And I do think they're going to win more seats than anyone expects. Secondly, Labour will have absolutely nothing to do with Reform under any circumstances. So he's talking about the potential of a hung parliament. In the scenario where it genuinely, hypothetical, right? Labour do not have a majority. Conservatives have got far fewer seats. Reform have got the second largest number of seats, or Conservative and Reform have got a similar number of seats. And Conservative plus Reform equals enough to make a government. And therefore, the only way that Labour makes a government is if it gives in and does a coalition with Reform. This chap is saying they would walk away from that. I don't believe any party would walk away from a distasteful coalition. I just don't believe they would. But I could be wrong about that. That's one of the things I'd love to ask you. In that scenario, do you think Labour would turn their nose up and go, no, we'd rather not be in government than do a coalition with you guys?
No.
You don't know exactly. So he said the emergence of Reform means Labour's majority would increase. I disagree with that for reasons I've explained. And that was interesting, his last point. Fourthly, housing is one of the least likely policy areas to be on the table in any hung parliament. Yeah, fair enough. I see that, but what I think might happen, I suppose, what would I hope for in a scenario anything like this? If we ended up with Nigel Farage as the leader of the opposition, I just think he's such a pain in the arse in that scenario that he might actually effect better policy changes than would happen if it was the Tories in opposition. Doesn't mean I like him, doesn't mean I'm a supporter of him. What I mean is I think it'll actually get stuff done potentially because they will already be thinking and worrying about the next election. So I will shut my trap.
And you can have the opposing view. So look, my view is quite simple on this. Farage is a very divisive figure. You either love him or hate him.
Very.
And he is most known for Brexit. When we look at the Brexit vote, roughly 72% of the electorate turned out of 46 million people. That means 33 million people voted. Only 12%, it's estimated, under 4 million, only 12% of those people who voted for Brexit were Labour supporters. Now, that's not an accurate figure. That's from a whole bunch of different polls. We don't know for certain, obviously, but that suggests that it would have to be a massive upset for a substantial proportion of Labour supporters to switch to Reform. So you're right, they'll pick up people from floating. They may pick up many from the Conservatives, where most of them will come from, and a whole bunch of others who, for various reasons, both good and bad, might think that Farage is the right person for the country. However, the maths on it suggests that Labour will win an outright government. It will not be a hung parliament. However, you're right, it's not impossible. I mean, it's certainly not impossible. As you've said, actually, for housing, you've looked at the Lib Dems and they've got the best manifesto on housing. And some of their other policies from the things that I've read look pretty reasonable. I've never voted Lib Dem in my life, but we just don't know until the election. I agree with you that if we were in the situation where it had to be a coalition between Labour and Reform, Labour would bite the hand off because they want to be in power. However, they could form coalitions, not just with one other party. You can have a three-party coalition. You can have an all-party coalition. It starts to get really tricky at that point. The thing that I absolutely agree with you on is that we need change in this country. And somebody wrote to you yesterday, I think on X, saying, well, you just want change. Would you take it if it meant this? And, my answer, and I've spent my working life effecting change at companies operationally and, through capital projects. And the reason is this: when any system, whether it's a company, a religion, a political system, gets to the point where it is in decline, the status quo is in decline. And I think we can say that this country has been going downhill now for a number of decades. The best thing to do at that point is to change. And people will go, well, yeah, but change for change's sake doesn't help. Well, if the status quo is declining, it is a very strong argument that making a change, even if it's the wrong change, even if that change is not effective, is better because you have overcome the inertia of the status quo. You have a body in motion, and steering something that is moving is much easier than steering something that is either stationary or dead. If you're a sailor or a motorboat enthusiast, the rudder doesn't work unless you're going forwards, or you fly airplanes. Rudder's not much use to you unless you've got motion. And at the moment, we have been static in this country for decades. And that is worse for us long term than the pain that might be implemented by bringing in a Farage to run the country. Yeah, people will hate it. It will be terrible, but boy, it'll move them. And when it moves them, then real change, useful change will be affected. It's transitory pain for long-term gain. So, we'll see. I don't think Farage, I think Reform will win many more votes than people expect. And I think they will win some seats. But I don't think it'll be a hung parliament, is my view.
Do you think, even if it's not a hung parliament, there's a chance of seeing Farage in opposition rather than the Tories?
Jesus, the way the Tories are polling at the moment, yeah. I hate to say it, but there's a higher chance of that than of there being a hung parliament.
That's my point. This is why this is such big news to me. Because even with Farage just in opposition, but Labour having a majority, that is a very different House of Parliament, Houses of Commons, to Labour with the Tory opposition. Because the Tory opposition will be basically absent, because they're going to be going through a complete, who knows what's going to happen to them. They're going to effectively go a bit like Voldemort, just disappeared into the wilderness for a few years in Harry Potter. It's just like ceased to exist.
We'll start to see skulls in the sky.
Right, yeah, exactly. But, I just think politics would be interesting. I mean, he's even stated his intention. I don't think Farage has any interest in actually running the country. I don't think he does. He's too much of a bon vivant. He just wants to sit in the pub and smoke and drink. That's fine.
And disrupt. He is a classic disruptor.
He calls himself an issues campaigner. He repeatedly calls himself that, right? And so in other words, he's a hangry. He wants to be a bloody nuisance. And he said, I want voting to Westminster so I can be a bloody nuisance. And my point is that the housing market, whatever you think of Farage, the housing market might see some change, any change. And it's more likely with a Labour majority, okay, that we see change with a Reform in opposition than if we see, then it's more likely that we see change with Reform in opposition than if we have the Tories in opposition. That's my point. As you just said, there's a very real chance of that happening. And that's why this is big news, that he's chosen to stand, because he has clearly mobilized things. He has clearly altered the course of this election. There's no question about that. No question. And don't confuse, people should not confuse my excitement at the possibility of change coming in the housing market.
With you loving Farage.
Exactly.
But you do love him.
No. I love how entertaining it is to watch him. I love how entertaining it is. I love the fact he's just a grenade. He's a grenade thrower. Ka-ching.
Mhm.
You know, you watch him in the European Parliament, and the way he just stood there insulting them all.
He is an orator, and he is a bright, insightful orator. Whether you believe in his policies or not is sort of irrelevant in this situation, simply because it's not Tory, it's not Labour, it is different. It will motivate people, whether in a good way or a bad way. It will get some bloody movement, which is what this country needs.
And Prime Minister's Questions Time with Farage versus Starmer is just going to be a walkover every single time, because Starmer is a wet blanket at the dispatch.
Oh yeah, useless. Which for a QC or KC, whatever it would be now, you have to wonder.
Anyway, I despair at the complete lack of any meaningful change being put forward by the Tories or Labour in housing. Just absolutely despair of it. It's also astonishing to me how, up until this week's announcement of Farage throwing his hat in the ring, everyone was just bored with the. This is the other thing. This whole £2,000 worse off under Labour, whether was he lying or not, for that to be the dominating topic of the week, to me, couldn't be a better example of why we're just like, what, really? That is what's going to get all the headlines? And Sunak saying £2,000 and Starmer calling him a liar. That's what we're going to all write about? Really? Come on.
But don't you love the fact that whether it's £2,000 or £3,000 under the Tories, nobody has yet put down, that I have seen, a definitive answer. Everyone is still arguing a point. And if you can argue over how much tax is actually going to be collected at a very, simple calculation, then either something's wrong with our tax system, our mathematicians, or it's just all lies.
Yeah, exactly. I love this comment. Fraggle H says, change is always a risk. Yeah, I agree. Of course it is. But change is necessary. Yeah. Florian G says, that's a good point. Make people embrace change. That's the problem. And I think as a country, we are guilty of going, we're not happy. Everything's terrible. No. Don't change anything. No, exactly. Don't.
Because
change, but you can't change anything. All right.
No.
Just keep it just as it is, but change everything. But don't change anything.
Because for the vast majority of the population of this country, it's never been so good. Don't get me wrong, the cost of living recently has been horrible and the lack of wage growth since 2008. But you've got Netflix, haven't you? You've got a nice big telly. You can eat decent food. By decent, I mean you can get food from all over the world at any time of the year. Yeah, I mean, we live in places where we don't have to walk outside in the cold to take a shit. You've got plumbing and you've got water you can drink from the tap. And actually, although there is a lot to complain about, we've just got so used to the comfort that the possibility of risking any lowering of standards by changing it, we just go, oh, no, it's too difficult. And that's how empires are destroyed.
I've got an anecdote about this. I used to run a hand car wash in the car park of Crawley Station in West Sussex. That's a statement that will surprise many people. It was after I'd been fired from my job in the city, and right in the early days of me finding my own way as someone who wanted to be my own boss. But I ran a car. I had a lease with British Rail, and it was all legit, properly set up, and I employed up to, at one point, 16 people. I was 23 years old, and most of them were out of prison. And for a posh boy brought up in lap of luxury, this was a very, very unexpected career turn. Me managing most of these guys who were older than me and everything else. Anyway, what's the point of the story? The problem with hand car washes, as anyone who's been will know, is that either they're dead and they're empty, or they've got queues. It's all because it's weather dependent and time of the week dependent. And so I had this problem in my business, which was that we were losing money whenever it was busy because we couldn't get the cars through fast enough. So I offered my team a zero downside, upside only option to their pay, which was for every car we cleaned over a certain number, they would get an extra bonus. There was no downside. This was like your fixed hourly pay stays the same, no matter what. But when it's really, really busy, if we get busy, it's harder work, isn't it? So you all deserve a bit more money. And I announced this thinking they're going to love this. The next day, Charlie, we want to have a word with you, please. Okay, cool. I thought, great, this is going to be brilliant. We don't like the new pay system. We want to keep it as it is.
The reasoning?
I thought to myself, hang on a second. Is it a wind up? Was it not a wind up? And the end of the conversation was, if we don't understand it, we don't trust it. We want to know, we do this many hours, we get this much pay, end of.
But you could have more pay.
I mean, what you're suggesting, we don't know how much we're going to get. And I said, but it'll either be the same as you're getting or more. And they're like, no, sorry, please just leave it the way it is. I've never forgotten that. Because they were all in agreement.
Yes.
They were all in agreement.
I mean, that's nuts. I'm just voting off my own fingers.
I remember saying to them, is it a trust thing? Like, no, we do trust you. We wouldn't work for you if we didn't trust you. I said, because then if you trust me, why don't you trust me? Let's just try it. No, please, honestly. And what I think it comes down to is a lot of people want certainty without question.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just certainty without question is more valuable to them than uncertainty that should be better. They just want certainty.
I understand that. I mean, if you're to talk about estate agents, the old days of the negotiator who got absolutely peanut salary and it was all bonus dependent, I understand that they would like some more certainty and they would be willing to take lower bonuses. But if there's no downside, if you're going to get the same wage anyway, and the only thing is upside, at that point, it's a bit nuts.
Do you know what? I tried to keep pushing it and they actually got cross with me, so I left it.
Yeah.
And what I did was that I actually just, because I wanted to calculate, in their mind, I wanted them to think every extra car we do is an extra quid or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
On top of our basic pay. But in the end, what I did was I just, when we had a good day, I just gave them a bit extra. And they were always grateful for that.
But it wasn't formal. If you'd made it formal, not happy.
It's funny, isn't it? And I can't remember why I told that story, but it's about people not liking change.
Yeah. No, well, they don't. I mean, it's the hardest thing when you get brought into a large multinational sort of firm, and they say, "Look, we've got a real problem here," and you say, "Right, we need to change these things." It takes a few years to learn that the first thing you have to do when people say you have to bring the staff on the journey, as a 25-year-old, you go and slam your face into a desk and start ranting at people. As a 45-year-old, you go, yeah, if we don't actually get this familiarized around the entire office, get people's buy-in, set up stupid stakeholder groups, get working groups together, get it advertised, they'll never adopt it. And your success or failure depends entirely on your communication skill at the outset.
Yeah. I had another quick one, because it's quite a funny one, a shorter one. So when we were doing photography and floor plans and virtual tours for estate agents in London, we had offices in Richmond, and we had about 20 people in the office, and we had about 20 guys out on the road shooting photographs and floor plans all day. And we had an office full of Dell computers. I had a Dell laptop. Everyone else had Dell computers, because right there, they were the best value. And this was early 2000s. And I remember deciding myself to try an Apple MacBook, because I thought to myself, they're twice the price and people are buying them. And I don't believe people are buying them just because they've got more money than sense. There must be a reason. And I decided to buy one. And it took me about 2 weeks to get familiar with the differences, the operating system differences. And after that, I was like, oh my God, this is great. So I said to my office, okay, guys, who wants to change to Apple Macs? And they were all like, all of them. No. We like our Windows. We know our Windows. Leave it at that. And I said, well, look, I think, because all of you complain that your computers crash, Windows crashes 2 or 3 times a day, get blue screen of death, blah, blah, blah. I said, I'm going to get 4 iMacs, so 4 of you, just 20% of you. You can volunteer or otherwise I'll pick you. Anyway, I got 4, put them in there, and I said, 30 days. Just use it for 30 days. And after that, I will give you your Dells back if you don't like it. And so after 30 days, I came and said, right, guys, I come to take your iMacs. They're like, no! And they loved them. And then the rest of the office changed. And it's this like, I had to kind of force it on them. And then once they tried it, they liked it. Oh my God, selling estate agency software to agents is like 10 times worse than that. Anyway, sorry. I'm rambling here, but yeah. One last point I wanted to bring up with you. Last week we talked about the mortgage approvals number ticking up.
Yeah.
And that might be making me think, oh, maybe there's more. It feels like a blip to me. I mean, looking at everything else,
yes,
it's all looking negative in terms of the economy itself, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
People keep saying, oh, but the Purchase Managers Index, the global S&P Purchase Managers Index for the UK has just come out, and it's 54 now. Does that matter? I mean, what is it? How relevant is that index?
Well, I mean, it is relevant, but it's based on gut feel. I mean, it's not hard science, and this is your problem. People are feeling it's spring. Everyone feels a bit more frisky and optimistic in spring, don't they? Or summer, and this is the problem. A lot of this is not objective; it's subjective. But can I share a screen with you?
Yeah, I love to. Always. Everyone loves that when you do that.
Just because somebody mentioned it earlier, and you're talking about the economy, and although these charts are a little old, they are from February, I think. Oh, come on.
While you're doing that, someone called Adomus on YouTube says, Charlie, it took me 12 years to get on the housing ladder. The only reason why is because for the first time, house prices fell to where my wage could just attain one.
Yeah.
He goes on to say, I spent all that time chasing the rung.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can't remember who mentioned this, but somebody did earlier. You can see this graph runs from 1955 all the way to 2023. It actually runs to 24. The last quarter of 23, beginning of 24. This is gross domestic product per capita.
Is this on X, by the way, this graph?
Yeah, I think so. I posted these.
Because people would love to go and look at that in detail on their own. So while you're talking about it, I'm going to see if I can find it on your timeline and I'll put a link to it.
So when they talk about our economy and how strong it is and how GDP has grown and all this sort of good stuff, you've got to put that in the context of how many people have come into the country. And yes, total GDP has grown. But if you want to work out whether you feel wealthier or not, you need to have GDP per capita. And also bear in mind that there are a small number of very rich people in this country and a large number of really quite poor people. So this is averaged per capita, and that's not the way it actually works. But what you can see is from 1975, after the early 70s recession, all the way through until 2008, our GDP per capita really was going up. These 3 green trend lines are all heading in the same place. The last time we were as bad as we were from 08 through until 19 was all the way back in the 50s, the post-war period, and 60s, where you still had rationing for some of that period. But this is our recovery from COVID. And what you can see is actually there is no recovery. As somebody pointed out in your comments earlier, we've actually been technically in recession from 2019 onwards. So if I just zoom that in a little bit, you can now see this is just a zoomed in version from 1981. After the recession of the early 90s, it took 14 quarters to get back to our pre-recession level. After the 2008 recession, it took 29 quarters to get back to pre-recession level.
7 years.
Yep.
No, yeah.
And here you can see, and bear in mind, this is quarterly GDP per capita. So multiply that by 4, which will take you up to the £35,000 a year. That is the average salary. And there you go. That's what we're really looking at. So when people talk to you about, yes, the economy is going gangbusters. No, there's strength in the economy. I'm not even looking at commercial real estate here. I mean, nothing. Not looking at debt, not looking at servicing debt. This is just our productivity. I mean, the base case. Without productivity, you can't service your debt because you have no money. You can't invest in public infrastructure because you have no income, no purse for the country. When you tax people, you get less tax because they're not earning enough to be paying the tax, and so on and so forth. So quality of living goes down. So the first thing that you look at, much as it's a fudged statistic, is per capita GDP. And that tells you right away things are not on the up. And this election is, without change in the country, this election will change nothing in terms of where we are going, in how we feel day to day, in how wealthy we are, how happy we are. All of these things predicated from this set of data.
Can I ask you a question about that graph?
Yeah.
To you, is this one of the most significant charts to show the true extent of how truthfully our economy is performing? I mean,
yes.
When you look at it over, what is it, going back to the 50s? Because that's 70 years or something. I mean, that's 1981 you're going back to. It does look sort of, you can ignore the COVID part, right? It's just bizarre. I mean, because I think people who are not perhaps fluent in dealing with graphs might think that anything other than a downward spike is irrelevant. It's quite hard to understand that the long-term trend of that graph is fairly stable with a few blips here and there. What's happening now looks different to all those other times.
Yeah.
It just looks like it's just over. It's just over.
This is the decay of the first world. I mean, don't get me wrong, America's graph looks slightly different, but that is only because they are the global reserve currency. Look at France, look at Spain, look at Italy. Again, Canada, Australia, slightly different situations because they started from a much lower benchmark. They were later in their cycle. In the 70s, they were still paying Brits to go out to work in Australia. Whereas the 70s was the first time in this country, just after the 70s, that we became an immigration country. Before that, we'd had Brits going out of the country around the world to make their money in America, in Australia, all of these sort of places, because England was a pretty grimy place in the early 70s, after we were still in the recovery period after the Second World War. But from 75 onwards, look at this, bang, 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 all those green lines. Look, we're all getting richer and richer and richer. This blue line from 08 to 19 would have been substantially lower than that if it hadn't been for the quantitative easing. And yet, all that did was just push it off to the point that we're at today, where, we're in even greater decline. And this hasn't got any better in the first quarter of 24. It's continued that trend going down.
Just quickly also to recap, the relevance of this stuff to the housing market is that in the medium and long term, for people expecting house prices to continue rising, it just, and this is why even Richard Donald from Zupa agrees that there's going to be no real house price growth for some time.
Yeah, decades.
And therefore, people who think that buying a home is a good financial move shouldn't think that anymore. And this is why. This is why. Right? It's just not possible. You buy a home to have a home, 100%. I've never said don't buy a home if you need a home, but do not think, because all I can hear over and over again is people saying, oh, house prices double every 10 years. That's not true when you take inflation into account, number one. And number two, the fact that they even have doesn't mean that they will. It just doesn't mean that they're going to continue doing that.
Yeah.
I found myself asking the question because I gave Rachel Reeves some pretty harsh criticism recently. By the way, I linked to that graph in the live chat. There's a link to that tweet with that graph for those of you who want to go and look at it. I was pretty harsh about Rachel Reeves. She did that interview saying, "Oh, I used to work at the Bank of England, therefore I know how to be Chancellor." That frustrated me, and I posted about it. And I thought to myself, okay, Charlie, what would I do if I was Chancellor? What headline grabbing thing if I was going to be Chancellor and I was trying to get myself elected in a party where I was going to be the Chancellor? What would I do? And I thought about it a lot. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you or not. I don't think I have.
No.
I would. This is going to upset environmentalists. I would scrap, as in scrap, fuel duty.
Right. There's a lot of tax in that.
No, it's 24 billion a year.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not that much in the grand scheme. Okay. It's 24 billion a year, which is less than 2 months of the NHS costs. And the point is that it benefits the lowest income people the most. It's an instant overnight thing that requires almost no logistics, almost no administration, just a little bit, right? It would instantly give a shot in the arm to businesses, people who have to commute. So if you think about people who work from home tend to have slightly higher paid jobs than people who need to travel to work because their job is a physical
absolutely.
one.
Yeah.
Right? So lower paid people would get the biggest benefit proportionately out of a scrapping of fuel duty. And it's not perfect. And people go, oh, but what about the environment? Like, honestly, it's not going to change. We might see a slight increase in how much fuel gets used, but Britain on a global level doesn't even move the needle in the margin of error of carbon dioxide emissions. It doesn't matter. And also people's ability to make a living and pay their bills is more. Yes, we all want a nice future, but also we want an okay now, please.
Yep.
And so, and I also thought about businesses, small businesses, all businesses. Fuel duty, you would give the economy a shot in the arm, because it wouldn't just be the value of the duty being put back into the economy. It would be mobility, actual physical mobility. People would go out more. People would see each other more. I just think that would catalyze a little bit of a rebound in the economy as a whole, for small businesses, for individuals. I really think it would make a massive difference.
You're going mad, because the next thing you'd say, if we want the mobility in the country, is we're going to have to get rid of stamp duty.
But
wow, duty and stamp duty. In fact, let's get rid of all the duties, especially on alcohol.
No, you still would have taxed fags and booze.
That seems very unfair.
I get that.
I go nowhere.
Well, yes, I know what you're saying, but I would scrap stamp duty. It would need to be replaced with something different. But again, I just honestly, why hasn't that happened? Why haven't people reformed property taxes?
Yeah,
because government is not functioning correctly, and they couldn't, even if they decided they wanted to. It wouldn't happen.
Okay, so this is where we get really political, Charlie.
Yeah.
Have you been watching what's happening in Argentina?
I've not been watching closely, but I'm vaguely aware of it. Yeah, go on.
You want to talk about shaking up politics, making a change in the country?
Tell us, give us a heads up for people who don't know.
No, it's so much. I mean, you need to have a look at what he's been doing since getting power. I mean, it's the most
recent case study that socialism bankrupts countries and ending socialism stops the deficit, right?
Yeah, I mean, old Javier, we'll have to see. He calls himself, well, he's a member of the Libertarian Party, but the sort of work that he's doing to change everything from their general laws to their bureaucracy, massive. And now it's almost to the point where you would say, well, like a dictator. And I think you and I have discussed many times my view on dictatorship as a form of government is about the only way you get things done. So, we'll see. We'll see. But for all of your audience, it's definitely worth having a look at. I can never pronounce his surname. It's Milei, Javier Milei, the president, prime minister, whatever he is of Argentina. Just have a look at some of the laws that he's passed.
You've reminded me about something that I said, which is when I was complaining about Rachel Reeves being, if that's the chancellor we're faced with, then we really are fucked, because she doesn't even know how incompetent she's going to be in that job. And someone said to me, well, who would you recommend, Charlie? And I said, well, someone who's got track record of delivering tangible improvements in a large organization. And someone said, oh, but the government's not a business. Now, I would argue differently. I would argue that running the government is like running a business, because you've got customers who are paying you money, i.e. you've got the taxpayers. You've got suppliers. And in a really simplistic way, you've got a business. The government is a business where the customers are paying very high prices, very high taxes. But the business is so badly run that the company is being ripped off by its suppliers, who are charging really high prices and not delivering to basic service levels. And so what's this business selling? It's selling opportunity and quality of life in society. That's what it's selling. It's selling security, health, opportunity, and quality of life. And it's not selling any of those things very well, is it? If you think about it. And that's what the government's doing. They're saying, hey, choose us to run this business where we're going to sell you security, opportunity, education, health, and a better way of life. That's what they're pitching us, is that they want to run the business that sells us those things in return for our tax money. And unless you've operated businesses where you do have to measure the input and output and results and the metrics, if you've got people running in government who don't believe in that sort of thing, like actually looking at the inputs and outputs and going, is there value for money here? Then you end up with a situation that we've got, which is this bloated, ineffective thing where we've got, at the same time as the highest taxes ever, we've got the worst public services in living memory.
Yeah.
And so if you put idealists into government, like Argentina had before Milei, it gets worse and worse and worse, because what do? They throw more and more and more of taxpayers' money, because they borrow, just thinking that money alone, more money will solve the problem. And there are how many countless businesses left that out there who've borrowed more money and still failed. Anyway, Alex, you said you got to go. We probably should be going, hour and 20 minutes. Anyway, guys, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that was interesting. Lots of stuff we could go on talking about. For all new followers here, Alex, if you've got to shoot off, go for it.
Okay, Charlie, absolute pleasure. Catch you later.
What a pleasure. Catch you later. Yeah. For all of you who are new followers here, I'm going to just, if you are a long-standing follower, nothing I'm about to say is worth staying for, because I've said it all lots before. But if you are a new follower here, I'm going to quickly run through, because I've got quite a few of you watching. I'm going to run through the basics if you are moving house, of what you need to know if you're a buyer or a seller in this market. By the way, I did a poll about the election affecting the housing market, and roughly 1 in 5, 1 in 4 people who are currently moving have said that the election is slowing down their plans. So there is some impact on transactions and pipelines and the ability to move, but mostly people are saying that it's not changing their moving plans. If you are a buyer, buying because you need a home, then provided you found a home that you want to live in, and you've had an offer accepted on it, and it's an offer of an amount you can afford without overextending yourself, it always makes sense to buy and not wait, okay? Because having a home is more valuable than not having a home if you need one. You can get on with your life, on with your career, on with your family plans, on with everything else, and you're not sitting in life's waiting room. Always buy now, just don't overpay. By not overpaying, I mean don't overextend yourself, and don't pay more than you think you could sell it for if you had to sell it again the next day, unless you are aware that you're paying a premium to secure it and you're okay with that. Does that make sense? If you can't afford for your property value to drop the moment you've bought it, don't pay more than you could sell it for the next day. But if you're in a position where you need to secure that particular property because it's close to a school or close to work, or it's the only one you can get in time, and you can afford in a bidding scenario to pay 1 or 2 or 3% more than other people, and you know that's what you're doing, and you accept that you wouldn't be able to sell it for that amount in the next couple of years, then it's okay. You're not overpaying personally. You're choosing to pay a premium to secure it, but you're not overextending yourself because it meets your needs. That's so the definition of overpaying varies depending on who you are. If you are a seller, by the way, this is why a really good agent, if you're a seller, this is why getting competing bidders is important to find out if there are buyers out there who would be happy to compete with other buyers to pay a price. First-time buyers borrowing are going to think, that's unfair, Charlie, don't encourage that because we always get outbid by cash buyers. It's a marketplace. All you can do if you are looking for bargains is to keep on looking at the properties that have been on the market for a long time. Go and view those, and you'll get sellers who are tired of being on the market, who need to sell, who will eventually sell. And they will be selling below market value because they made the mistake of overpricing to begin with and waiting for the market to come up. Now, having said that, there are parts of the country where popular properties in the first-time buyer level who are experiencing competition with buyers coming from downsizing are seeing prices holding and even rising. There are some places where that's happening. And that tends to be at the lower end of the market where first-time buyers are buying. And there are places in the market where there are properties that are falling quite significantly in price. That tends to be at the higher end of the market in the south and the southeast of England at the moment. Huge generalization. But the point is, the only way to find out what's happening is to be out viewing yourself. If you are a seller, do not make the mistake of thinking any old agent just sticks on Rightmove and finds a buyer. That's mistake number one. Because finding a buyer is less than half the battle. Once you found a buyer and agreed a price, you've then got to get the deal sold and exchanged, and that's where the real skill and work comes in. You've got a cheap agent. If you've got a cheap low-fee agent, they will not have the resources to pay people to proactively progress that deal for you. They'll just wait and hope that it goes through, and if it falls through, they'll be like, oh, well, it fell through. This is why you don't need a cheap agent. It's a massive mistake to get a cheap agent. Choose your agent as though your future depends on it, because it does. Price your property to look like it's the most attractively priced of its kind, and you will get the competing buyers in the first week or two who will then compete with each other to find out what the best price the market will offer you now is. If you wait and those buyers turn into a trickle, one a week over 6 weeks, you've got no competing bidders. You've got a property that looks like no one wants to buy it. That's all that happens. Good agents will get this right. And good agent will get your marketing price, your launch price just right to attract competing buyers and then get you above that asking price. These are just the headlines, right? For people who are thinking, but Charlie, what about your 35% house price fall predictions? Got a long way to run to see whether I'm right or not on that. It's definitely true to say that at the lower end of the market, is going to be closer to my 15% fall predictions. Because I said it would be 35% average, ranging from 15% to 50%. I may be wrong. I may well be wrong. And if I am wrong, it doesn't change anything I'm saying, because if you need to buy, you need to buy. And if you need to sell, you need to sell. And you should be out there doing that, whatever's going to happen to house prices. Only investors should be worrying about what future house prices are going to do from a point of view of whether it affects their buying now or not. And I'm not here for you guys. Right? I'm not here to make investment commentary. But based on, at the higher end of the market, in certain parts of the country, we've already seen more than 20% falls. And I'm still, my expectations haven't changed. It feels like it's taking forever, and there are parts of the country where prices aren't falling. I do accept that. So I said it's an overall average, but the other thing I've noticed about this is that it doesn't seem to be people who are moving home that really care that much. If you've got to move, right? It seems to be people who care about whether I'm right or wrong, which I find really bizarre. Why you'd care whether I'm right or wrong? It doesn't matter either way. Maybe I'll be right, maybe I'll be wrong. It doesn't change whether you're moving now. Anyway, do we have any last minute questions, guys, while I'm still here? GP says, I've found a number of properties which fit my buying requirements. What's the best offering tactic to find which seller will give the greatest discount on their asking price? Two answers to this question. First of all, if you want to place sellers off against each other, it assumes you've actually found more than one property you want to buy, because if you haven't, then that point is moot. The best offering tactic is the only offering tactic, which is to use my free offer email template, which is showing that you are most ready to proceed compared to other buyers. Okay. Now, whether you're competing against other buyers or whether you're trying to get a seller to lower their price, making your offer by email, showing that it contains your proof of deposit funds or verification from your conveyancer that you have approved funds, your mortgage in principle, your conveyancer already selected, and you've already been through the anti-money laundering regulation check, and you've already been through ID verification. So that's all done, and you're ready to buy your property search pack on the day the offer is accepted. By doing that, what you're demonstrating, not just saying, but you're demonstrating that you are deadly serious about proceeding to exchange that property faster than anyone else. That has a real value, both when you're competing with other buyers and also if you're trying to get a seller to accept a much lower offer than they would like, because that certainty has a real value to those sellers. And if you want to find that email, just search MHWC for Moving Home with Charlie, MHWC offer email, and you'll find it. It'll come straight up. Adomus says, I had to move, but your advice and commentary stopped me being rinsed, which I appreciate, Charlie. Thank you very much. That's the whole point of it. John Symes says, as a cash buyer, is it worth getting valuation done as an aid to negotiate on price? I suppose so. It depends on whether you're buying as a home or whether you're buying as an investment. Getting a valuation of what you'll do is you'll get what's called a red book valuation, which is supposed to be an objective and impartial valuation from a qualified valuer, a registered valuer. I mean, I would only be doing that if you're in a position where actually you've got the money, you just don't want to overpay, you want to find out what market value is, and there it is. But also, as a cash buyer, if there's no one else buying, do you just make the offer that's your maximum comfortable offer for your circumstances? And even if you are buying as an investor and you're buying cash, again, work out your maximum comfortable offer given your situation. I've half done the cash buyers template. Not there quite yet. Right, guys, I'm getting a sore throat because I've been talking for an hour and a half without a break. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Remember, if you are a buyer or a seller and you need representation for your mortgaging or your conveyancing, you can get it all on my website at mhwc.co.uk. There's the conveyancing link. And I work with, they just continue to knock it out of the park as the most reliable. They are getting transactions done on average 30 days faster than other conveyancers. They're very high quality guys I work with. If you can't find one that you trust and like and is professional, and you haven't got time to go looking, use these guys because they're fantastic. And same with mortgage brokers. If you can't find an independent whole of market mortgage broker that you like and trust, don't go viewing without a mortgage decision in principle, a proper credit checked mortgage decision in principle, okay? For two reasons. First of all, if you find a property that you love and you want to offer on, you're going to be a step behind other buyers that do have their mortgage in principle. And secondly, you will avoid being sucked into using an agent's in-house mortgage broker, which is a conflict of interest. If you want to book time with me, you can do so at this URL here, buymeacoffee.com/MHWC. You can book 30 minutes with me or 60 minutes with me on a private video call. And if you want to get I have partnered with a property search pack provider. If you are a buyer with a mortgage, you will be required to provide a property search pack to your lender. By offering to buy it on the day your offer is accepted, you speed the whole process up, and that's what makes sellers more likely to accept your offer. These can and are accepted by all conveyancers. If your conveyancer says, "Oh no, you must use ours," because they'll say, "Oh, it has to be regulated." It is. This is a fully regulated, approved one. So you can get them here. If your conveyancer doesn't get your property search pack on day one, because they say, "Oh no, don't do that," because if it falls through, a waste of money. That's totally the wrong approach. You want to know in advance if it's going to fall through. Oh, I know why conveyancers say that, because they want to be able to charge you whether it falls through or not. And if the property search pack throws up an issue at the beginning, it means they won't be able to charge you their fees. Can't believe that's only just occurred to me. All righty, guys. I'm going to actually stop now. All right. One last question that's too good not to take. GP again saying, question clarification. Surely offering a first and final offer gives me no negotiating room. I'm assuming you're a relatively new follower here. I've covered this a lot. If you are confident that you can out-negotiate people who do it all day, every day for a living, and you want to negotiate, that's entirely up to you. My advice of first and final offer is based on people who just do not want to be sucked into the manipulation and mind games of negotiation, because they're very effective and they work. So the first and final offer is just that. You can't make your first and final offer if you can't make one offer and then make the second one and call it your first and final offer, because it's your second and final offer. First and final offer means it's a yes or a no. It means you know straight away, yes or no, are they going to sell me this house? There's no point in trying to save a few thousand quid if it risks you losing the property to someone else. And that happens all the time. Very close friend of mine just lost out on their dream home because they tried to negotiate instead of offering what they were prepared to pay. And someone else offered what the seller wanted, which is what my friend would have paid, but they lost it. And they kicked themselves. They were absolutely gutted. Absolutely gutted. It's never a worthwhile. Like when you compare let's say a £5,000 saving with losing the home you want to live in, the risk reward just doesn't stack up. It's not worth it. Guys, I've got to go. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. More soon. And all the best.